Welcome to magAMedia Podcast. I am at Lazy Meatball.
And I'm at Small Town Andrew.
And today we are speaking with Angel Mom, Virginia Krieger. She has a fantastic story to tell today. Welcome, Virginia.
Thank you for having me. I am so glad that you're paying attention to what's going on with the Angel families. My daughter Tiffany was the light of my life. She was an amazing, wonderful, loving, talented young woman, the center of my universe. She was a semi-finalist on American Idol. She graduated high school a year early, and at 17, she was already in college. Tiffany came back to Ohio for 2 weeks to visit relatives, and she fell in love, as so often happens with young people. And at that point, she wanted to put school on hold and pursue this new relationship that she found. Tiffany died on February 2nd, 2015, due to an overdose of heroin laced with fentanyl. While she was in Ohio, Tiffany fell through a porch and injured her back. And we had gone to the physician, and they wanted to do further testing. She was in a great deal of pain and discomfort, and the insurance company denied the MRI that we needed to be able to figure out exactly what happened. At the same time that this went on, we saw a sudden rise in heroin and fentanyl related deaths in the U.S. Instead of calling it what it appeared to be, which was a heroin and fentanyl epidemic, our lawmakers labeled it an opioid epidemic, and the politicians immediately turned against physicians and big pharma, and they literally put fear in the medical community of treating chronic pain patients. The doctor had given Tiffany prescriptions in the interim until we were able to deal with the insurance company appeals to get her the MRI she needed. And as a direct result of legislation that was passed here in Ohio specifically, that dictated medical care and limited physicians on what they were allowed to prescribe for what conditions and how much, even though they had no medical degrees. And physicians started to find themselves being prosecuted. They found their licenses were in jeopardy. And in fear, they abandoned their patients and directed them into pain clinics. These pain clinics were not equipped to handle a massive influx of patients. And as a direct result of that, valid pain patients were being made to wait 6 to 8 weeks, up, and in Tiff's case, 3 months for an appointment. The rehabilitation community also was not ready to deal with a massive influx of patients. An example here is a hospital may have 4 detox beds, and now you've got 4,000 or 5,000 people fighting to be able to get one of those 4 beds. The same was true of the rehabilitation centers. So many valid pain patients, like Tiffany, sick, in pain, and withdrawing from these medications, were forced to seek out other means to treat themselves in the interim. 2 of Tiffany's friends obtained drugs and gave them to Tiffany, telling her that they would help with her pain. And after she took them, Tiffany reacted badly, and as she lay in a back room, slowly suffocating to death, these 2 women, whom weren't really friends, spent hours going back and forth to 2 different ATMs close to the home, making $100 withdrawals from Tiffany's bank account, stealing her money. They only called for help after Tiffany had already died. They made their last withdrawal, emptying the account completely, after the coroner had already come and taken Tiffany's lifeless body away, with no concern at all for Tiffany or for her 2 young children who were still at home. The women who left her to die were never held accountable. They were never prosecuted for her death, despite the fact that they had tampered with evidence, lied to the police, and admitted to purchasing and giving the drugs to Tiffany. I was living in Nevada at the time, and as I'm speaking to the detectives for an entire year, they were telling me they were investigating. And on the anniversary of her death, when I returned to Ohio, on the very day she died, February 2nd, I was in the police department, and I find out that they had closed the case within days of her death and hadn't even investigated the bank theft. I was so upset, and I felt so betrayed that I couldn't just let it stand. I couldn't prove the drugs. I couldn't prove anything else, but I did know I could at least prove the theft. So I went and I got the bank records. I contacted the banks, the ATMs, to see if they had the surveillance video available, and it was already too late. It was gone. The police hadn't even gotten the surveillance video. So I ended up spending a year on Facebook Messenger talking to one of the women and slowly getting the story from her of how Tiffany died, until she finally admitted that, yes, she had stolen the money from the bank account and used Tiffany's ATM card. So armed with that, I came back to Ohio and went to the prosecutor's office and demanded that something be done. The city prosecutor was appalled with what I shared, and he told me that, well, the best he could do was to charge her for petty theft under $1,000, and he would make sure that she served time in jail. So in the end, she served 28 days in jail. The second woman, oh, and by the way, that same woman who served the 28 days was rearrested because she tried to sneak drugs into the jail.
Wow.
Yeah, the second woman, who has a very lengthy criminal record, has gone on to be present at 2 separate other drug deaths, and was arrested in September for robbery while the resident was home. And what she said was she needed to get money for her dope boy. I went to see the prosecutor and to remind him who this woman was and that she had been a participant in Tiffany's death. And fortunately, he was sympathetic to the situation, and he bound her case over to the county instead of just letting her get a slap on the wrist again. The drug dealer is still at large despite a lengthy criminal record. And the Mexican cartels, which have flooded Ohio and the rest of the country, continue to operate with impunity over the border, with our own legislators fighting against the Department of Homeland Security and ICE to stop them.
So what do you feel when you hear people like Nancy Pelosi, Gavin Newsom, the governors of San Francisco and Seattle, fighting to protect these literal criminals and to have legislation passed that they will not defend our laws? And what does that make you feel when they say we're not going to help ICE?
It's as if they're rubbing salt in an open wound. It's painful to hear that. And I'll tell you why, because what they've done is they have tried to lump legal immigrants in with those who have court-ordered deportations. and they mislead the public into thinking that ICE and the DHS are picking up asylum seekers, and that's absolutely not the truth. Every single person on their list had already been to court. They'd already been in front of a judge, and the judge found them unfit to be in the country in most cases because they were criminals.
Exactly, and that's what Trump was talking about in his speech, that everybody had a hissy fit about. He's not talking about the people who want to come here to be safe. He's talking about the actual criminals. And the media just had a shitstorm, excuse my language, but they completely lumped all Mexicans, all Hondurans, everybody who's trying to come over into that criminal status, and that is not what he was talking about. But now we have to deal with the Democrats and liberals, progressives, whatever you want to call people who aren't into lawless, laws. We have to deal with those aftermaths. And unfortunately, let me go through some statistics here. The crisis is real. When we're talking about fentanyl, we have about 327 million people in the United States, and the ICE, the people that Nancy Pelosi, for instance, are fighting so hard against, they intercepted enough fentanyl last year to kill every single person living here twice. It's not just a little bit coming through. It's a lot. It's a lot.
And you mentioned earlier in your opening that Obama instituting the catch and release and just the lack of border security has really made the numbers jump. Is that correct?
Yes. When Obama reinstated catch and release in 2014, in less than 6 months, we saw a massive 500+% increase in heroin and illicit fentanyl-related deaths. And a recent DEA signature report, which they get the samples and they test them, and they're able to tell where these drugs are coming from, identified that 91.6% of the heroin alone in this country is Mexican in origin.
That's a huge number.
On the number of sanctuary cities, I wanted to tell you that I was shocked to find out that here in Ohio, where I live, we have 8 sanctuary cities. And on average, within a year of those cities calling themselves sanctuary cities, there was a 131% increase in heroin and fentanyl-related deaths. Wow. Ohio's been number 1 in the country for only one thing in the last 30 years, and that's the number of drug-related deaths. Not a record anyone should be proud of.
Ohio, I wouldn't have guessed that. I would have guessed something like Los Angeles or New York, somewhere with a really, really high population.
Yeah, no, Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Massachusetts, hotbeds for these cartels. And it's terrifying. I mean, we're losing 180 people a day.
Yeah, people think so.
In fact, in 2017 alone, we lost more people than we lost in the Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam wars combined.
Wow.
In a single year. We're averaging 50,000 a year. And to date, since Obama reinstated catch and release, we're looking at approximately 250,000 American lives lost.
Wow. So people who act like illegal immigration's only affecting the cities on the border and the states on the border, they could not be more wrong. It's affecting Americans all over. I read that I read there's been so many opiate deaths in the last few years that it's actually lowered the life expectancy of Americans. That's how serious of a problem this is.
Well, now overdose deaths have they are now the number 1 cause of accidental death in the United States. And that's according to the Center for Disease Control. The trail of suffering doesn't end with just the deaths. We have children who are pouring in to the foster care system whose parents are either addicted or they've died. And they're the smallest and the most unthought of victims of this epidemic. They like to call it an opioid epidemic to deter from the fact that we didn't see a significant rise in prescription-related deaths. But what we did see was a 500% increase in heroin and fentanyl-related deaths. And I've said from day one, we have a heroin and fentanyl epidemic. And Mexico is leading the charge, specifically the Sinaloa cartel. If you look at the homelessness in California, a lot of that is drug-related. If you look at the communities that have been destroyed, completely destroyed, where people can't even walk down the street anymore because of the drug dealers, the crime, and the addicts who've made it unlivable. The collateral damage of the failed border policies is insane. And if I would challenge any Democrat to say to me that it is better to have people fleeing these very brutal cartels in Mexico and take a journey where 40% of the women and children are raped, kidnapped, or killed, than for us to go to Mexico and take out these cartels and restore their homes. If you truly cared about people, what about the ones who can't leave for whatever reason? So do we just leave them behind and ignore them? If you really care, then we need to talk about the source of the problem, and that source are the Mexican drug cartels.
So you brought up an interesting point earlier. They have these death squads. What do you know about those?
And I just recently found this out as I'm learning more and more about how the cartels operate, but they have these, they could be the prom queen, beautiful young women who are part of female death squads. And if they could easily hide in and amongst these migrants, which is what they do, by the way. These immigrants who come in, they'll come in with them. And you wouldn't know. You would think that this girl, was an innocent young girl. And one of them is specifically, she killed 9 people, dismembered them, and then drank their blood. This is the kind of brutality that we're talking about. The brutality these cartels are capable of is like nothing any American has ever experienced. Mm-hmm. We're talking, and I've tried to educate people on this, and social media, the atmosphere that it is today, they immediately take down the photographs. They don't want people to see them because it's too graphic. But it's not too graphic for them to be importing these cartel members into our neighborhoods next door, into where our children live. I saw their streets ankle deep with blood, dismembered corpses, and El Chapo even testified that they would give epinephrine to his victims so they could torture them longer. Dismembered corpses, beheaded bodies hanging from overpasses on highways. This is what these people do, and it's terrifying.
Yes,
I don't know about you guys, but that's the last thing I want my grandchildren to have to deal with, along with all the other things that we already have going on in our society.
See, and we touched on this earlier too about with the big melting pot of America, you realize that people with different cultures come here. And the thing about this is that really hits home to me is there's a different value put on life in Mexico versus U.S.
Absolutely. First of all, you have to realize that for a lot of people in Mexico, these cartels are heroes. They're like Robin Hood, except what they're doing is killing people with their drugs, but their attitude is, well, it's your fault. You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have used it. You shouldn't have bought it.
Right.
And
like
it's all just for money. There was a grandmother featured in a Vice News documentary on the Sinaloa cartel who was in the United States and she was deported, and she's now applying for asylum, by the way. she's on video in the poppy fields working to make heroin, and she was talking about how while she was here as our guest, she was still traveling to Mexico to work for the cartels for money. Now, here in the U.S., most good people have limitations as to what we're willing to do or not do to make money. And most people in the United States will not do things that harm other people for the almighty dollar. But that's not the case when you're dealing with a society who they're in survival mode. They will do whatever it takes. And if that means that they have to take out your child to do so, then they will. And that's that's a mindset that Americans cannot wrap their minds around, because for the most part, that is not how we operate here. Now, this is not to say that all people seeking to immigrate here are bad people. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is that hiding among them are bad people. One of the things that really gets me that a lot of people don't realize is that on that journey where 40% of the women and children are raped, kidnapped, or murdered, a lot of people ask for protection services. And the cartels are making money doing this too. They're offering protection services to help people get here. And if you don't have the money, which in most cases they don't, they trade services, which means the cartels will tell these people, we'll do it, but you've got to traffic the drugs for us in your body, or even worse, once they're here, they have to continue dealing drugs for the cartel, or they're going to kill their entire family here and where they came from.
So basically slavery.
Yes.
Right.
And that's what we're importing. And I've heard the Democrats say it so many times, and it bothers me to hear it, because I believe when someone comes to this country legally and they immigrate, which I have no problem with legal immigration, once they become a citizen, they're entitled to the same rights, privileges, benefits, and protections of every other American citizen, and that includes opportunity. And so when I hear people say on the left, well, we need them here because they do the jobs that nobody else wants to do, to me, that means you're importing a slave class of citizen that you have no intention of giving opportunity.
Right.
And it's wrong. It's absolutely wrong on every level. If they truly cared about immigrants, if they cared about Mexicans and the people in Central America, they would be fully supporting border security to prevent human trafficking and drugs from coming back and forth across the border, to stop the cartels from making money off human suffering. And they would support naming these cartels terrorist organizations, which will free up resources to allow us to go to Mexico, take out the cartels, and restore these people's homes and governments to them. What about the ones who can't leave, the ones that are stuck there? Do they not matter? Do we only care about the ones who, take this journey and then not even turn themselves in at ports of entry, but sneak around it so they can come in the dead of night? And somehow they think they're being good people by supporting that? It's dangerous and it's irresponsible.
Right. This tragedy fell on you in 2015, around the same time President Trump was running for office. Did a lot of things he said hit home for you right away on the campaign trail?
Absolutely, they did. And when Tiffany first passed away, I wrote to President Obama and I shared her story, and I begged him to do something about these cartels and these drugs. And I received no response, not even a form letter. But I did organize a small angel family group, and we sent Valentine cards to President Trump, including photographs of our children and our stories. And not only did President Trump hear us, he responded. He sent me a letter in response, which was amazing. Mm-hmm. But to be heard. And then he didn't stop there. He acted. Mm-hmm. And he's been our biggest advocate for angel families and against this drug epidemic. He's our biggest advocate, and he really truly cares that this is happening and wants to stop it. So,
what do you think about Melania and Trump's job so far?
I think they've done incredibly well, and I have to tell you that in the face of what I have seen to be, and I'm 54 years old, so I've seen, a few presidencies. They have dealt with the absolutely most reprehensible attacks by the media and by other politicians on the opposing side than I have ever seen in my life.
Yeah, it's unreal.
They have held themselves with such grace and dignity, and for President Trump to be able to continue to do the fantastic job he is doing while dealing with that much negativity and just pure, unadulterated hatred for no reason other than the fact that he won is incredible to me. That speaks, he keeps his promises, and and a lot of people like to say, well, he hasn't built the wall yet. No, but he is fighting like hell to build it.
That's right.
And because of that, he's going to continue to have my support. In fact, I've never been a person who was even interested in politics, but I am now, and it's because of him.
I feel the same exact way. I was never into politics until President Trump, just period.
Uh-huh. I felt like we were lost. And as I was saying earlier, when you look at what started all of this, where did the opening come in for these drugs to infiltrate the country? And I always look back to, in Ohio's case, I look at NAFTA. Ohio, did you know the median household income in Ohio is $23,000 a year?
Wow.
That's pathetic. After NAFTA came, and I remember when Bill Clinton was here talking about NAFTA, and everybody thought it would be great. He promised us more work, more industry, more jobs. And what happened was, over the last 30 years, we've watched our beautiful state turn into a ghetto. The jobs left. The places that Akron, Ohio was called Rubber City. It was the rubber capital of the world. And now the Firestone Tire Factory, which used to employ, I believe it was 40 or 50,000 people, is home to the county welfare office. From jobs to welfare in 30 years. And so you have this massive hopelessness in the community. They're completely forgotten and left behind. And when you have hopeless people in depression, what do? They try to escape from that, and they'll use drugs, they'll use alcohol, just whatever they can to help them cope with, the crappy life that they've been handed. And this is through no fault of their own. It's because politicians took personal interests above the best interest of the people.
Yeah. And going back to that, the best interest of the people, I mean, when you have the physicians being attacked like you wouldn't believe, like you said, the threatening to take away their license, being sued. You have legitimate people in pain, like your daughter. I mean, a herniated disc is pretty serious. We know of one woman specifically. She had some really horrible stomach pains. She was yanked off of her medicine because they found some marijuana in her system. She was self-medicating. They weren't giving her enough. She was always in pain. Instead of finding out why she was in pain and actually dealing with that particular illness, they yanked her off her pain medicines. She eventually was found to have stomach cancer. And that's why she was in so much pain. And then 2 weeks after, she died. They sent her to a hospice. It was so far gone, and she died. And she was in that much pain. If anyone's ever seen anybody fight with cancer, they see how much pain the person's in unless they're in a medically induced coma. It's not a pretty sight. I wouldn't recommend it for anyone. I wouldn't wish anyone to witness that, and to see people who are in legitimate pain being denied the medicine that they need so prevalently. And then you have this whole pain medicating issue, and this is why people are ODing a lot of the time, is because they're self-medicating, and it's just a circular pattern.
Yeah, it really is. And another great example is my great grandmother, who's 91. Bless her heart. She's amazing. She broke her hip last year. When we went into the emergency room, she's screaming in pain, and these emergency room doctors were so bullied and so afraid of what the government might do to them that they were going to prescribe her Tylenol in the emergency room.
For a broken hip.
Tylenol. And had I not been there, that's what it would have been too, because, I love my sister, but she wouldn't have argued with the doctors in the emergency room. She would have just said, okay, and talked to my grandma and just tried to help comfort her. And this is what we're dealing with. We have a traumatized medical community, and, people want to look at the doctors, but I want to remind people that they treat patients because of what the patient tells them. It's the only way they can. And how are they supposed to be able to identify pain? The only way they can is by trusting their patient. And did we have a lot of people who abused that trust? Yes, we did. But we also have a lot of valid people who are now hurting. My grandmother, who had to have a hip replacement surgery, she has terrible arthritis. She's a cancer survivor. She has to be able to get out of her house every 30 days to go to the pain clinic now to get her medication. She can't just have her doctor give her a prescription. And how fair is that to her?
It's not.
So there are many sides to the issue, but the problem, the medical community was already dealing with the substance abuse issue long before the federal government decided to stick their nose into it.
No.
They had already identified and put together pain contracts, and they were doing drug testing to make sure patients were taking their medicine. They were counting pills, random pill counts on suspected patients who might be abusing. They were well into this process before the federal government and state legislators stuck their nose in and started to dictate care.
Now, tell me a little bit about, you have a GoFundMe going. You're trying to raise some money for Tiffany's funeral loan. You owe a little under $9,000, which you've been paying off since 2015. You did have insurance, but they denied your claim for benefits.
Yes. When I had a claim, and I had an accident myself in 2003, and I've had 3 spinal cord surgeries since then. I'm going to have a 4th, and hopefully that'll be the last one. So I was both employed by the insurer and covered by them under an employee benefit plan. I had a small policy, $10,000. Just enough for the burial if something were to happen to one of my children. Should have been covered by the waiver of premium under my policy. And after Tiffany passed away, of course you can't wait when you're making funeral arrangements. So knowing I had this coverage, I went ahead, I took out a small, well, not small, but I took out the loan to cover the burial costs. And I applied for my benefits. And at first they came back and said, well, no, we're not going to pay this claim because she turned 26. And I came back and said, well, no, you have to notify us of our conversion rights of the policy. And you didn't. I had no idea that I needed to convert it. And so then they changed and said, no. Well, you weren't covered because your waiver of premium didn't cover your child life premiums. Well, and we terminated your coverage in 2006. Well, I said, then give me a copy of the termination letter. Well, they don't have it. So we've been going back and forth, and they finally responded to the Department of Insurance and said, well, it's archived, but we can't retrieve it. So there is no termination letter. So now what I'm struggling to pay my bills, help raise my grandchildren, and pay off this loan. And frankly, now that I know for sure I'm not going to get this benefit, it's got me in a really bad way. I've been using credit cards to buy groceries. I sold everything I can sell, and there's just nothing left. And
that's absolutely terrible. I'm sorry.
I just want to tell anyone listening, please go to her GoFundMe. It's listed in the video on YouTube or in the article. Please go to her GoFundMe and help this mother out. She's already been through so much. No mother should have to bury their child. No mother should have to worry about paying for their child's funeral. If you have anything to spare, please spare it for this grieving mother. Also, I want to touch on, there's a lot of people who have had their own kid die from an opiate overdose, a son or daughter, people who've had their kids murdered by illegals. Is there any place they can go to connect with other angel parents and other angel moms who have been affected by the Mexican cartels?
Absolutely. Please get in touch with us at angelfamilies.org. And on Facebook, we have an Angel Families page. And specifically, I want to say to all the parents, brothers, sisters, cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents of anyone who has died due to these illegal drugs, that you're an angel parent too. And there is no shame in what happened to your loved one, that you have a voice in this as well. And I've set up, you also need to contact us at angelfamilies.org if you want to share your story. I've also set up a separate Facebook page called Angel Families United, and this is specifically for those of you who've lost your children to these illegal drugs. Our fight is to have these cartels designated as terrorist organizations and to go after the source that took your children from you. And I just want to urge you to, don't be ashamed of what happened to you. There is no shame in it. And I've had a lot of people who've been incredibly supportive. And I've also had those people who basically say, well, your daughter deserved it. And I'm here to tell you that no one's child deserves to die due to a bad choice.
Yep. I want to say thank you so much. Your story is so powerful. Your daughter was an absolute gem. I mean, we watched her video. We're going to play it when we're done here. Your tribute video is heartbreaking.
Well, thank you. She, she started singing when she was 3 or 4 years old and just never stopped. And she was the most loving and giving person you could ever meet. And, if anyone had told me that would have been her end, I would have laughed at them. I would have said there's no way that could ever happen to her. She was my very best friend in this world, and losing her is I just can't describe to you the pain and the loneliness that I now feel having to go on without her. But when they say heartaches are real, I'm here to tell you that they are. It's a pain that centers in your chest.
For anyone listening, please take a minute and watch the video. This is so touching. Everyone always thinks that this happens to the outcasts in society, but then you watch this video and see this beautiful young girl who's a cheerleader, a singer, won tons of awards. It shows it can happen to literally anybody listening's family or someone they know.
Exactly. And I want to add in one thing too at the end for the parents out there. Please pay very close attention to your children and the environment. Right now, the United States has a very intense drug culture. It's in movies. They glorify it. They glamorize it online, in videos, at music concerts. We have concerts that you may not be aware of that are devoted strictly to drug use. And I'm talking about events like Coachella and Burning Man and all these electric type festivals. Those are all, the reason that they have these lights, the reason that they're set up the way they are, is to promote the use of hallucinogenic drugs and other drugs. I think they're going to have a Woodstock 50 in 2019. So these aren't just the innocent concerts anymore where your kids might possibly smoke a joint in the parking lot before they go in. It's changed, and the drug use is open, and it's openly promoted and capitalized on by those who are putting on these festivals and concerts. They're nothing more than giant rave parties, and they're specifically geared for drug use. So just be very aware of, you know, what your child is doing, what they're watching, who they're hanging around with, because this is a very grave danger facing all of us. Also, I want to put in that the Sinaloa cartel has taken over and is present now in every city, state, county east of the Mississippi, and they're moving west. So, you know, being aware right now, especially if your child's a teen, if you were ever going to be a stay-at-home parent, this would be the time. And I say that in all sincerity. If we don't secure this border, if we don't force these people and vehicles to come to ports of entry, and if we don't start x-raying and checking every vehicle coming through for hidden compartments for drugs, my fear is that this is going to continue to get worse. And, you know, we don't need to lose any more children, especially to something that we can prevent.
Yep. Thank you, Virginia. We're going to play this video. Before we go, is there any social media that you'd like to plug that people can get a hold of you on?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at Virginia Krieger. I am on Facebook at Jen Krieger. You know, you can reach me at Angel Families and Angel Families United also on Facebook. So there's a few good areas where you can find me. And of course, there is a memorial page for Tiffany on Facebook as well. It's in loving memory of Tiffany Lee Robertson. And of course, you can leave comments on the video as well. And I just want to thank you both for having me and giving me the opportunity to speak out about this.
No, thank you.
Thank you for staying in the fight with us.
Thank you so much, Virginia. Your story and so many countless others are so important. You know, people just really need to realize that, just like Andrew just said, I mean, this crisis is real. It's huge. It's bigger than you can imagine. And our president needs all the help that he can get.
He sure does. And yes, vote red in 2020. Please vote red.
That's right. Absolutely. That's right.
All right. Thank you, Virginia.
Thank you. Are we done?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. It was fantastic.
How do I